Hello, I'm Professor Benavides, and I want to go ahead and give you an overview of Chapter 6, Arrays. So this chapter will introduce you to one-dimensional arrays and two-dimensional arrays, and you'll find that they are often used with loops. The first thing that we learn is how to declare an array, and it kind of reminds me a little bit about declaring variables. Remember how we used to have something like int temp? Well, now we have int, and then we have these square brackets, and then the name of the array. So how do you create an array? There's different ways. One way is to use the new keyword. In this example that we see here, I'm going to go ahead and create an array that will hold 250 temps. I can populate it later. The other way is that the array will know how big it is given how many you populate it with. In this example here, string square brackets reindeer names gets Dasher, Dancer, etc. And it knows its size by the number that you populate it with inside of the curly brackets. As far as accessing the elements in an array, you simply specify the name of the array and then the brackets. If you want to make an assignment to that particular element, you simply use an assignment statement. Here we see 42 being assigned to my arrays of 31. The length of the array can be found by using the length property. It's not a good idea to just, for example, let's say that you were wanting to find the average of an array, and you know that there's, say, for example, 5 on here, 4 on here. Instead of just, putting in a magic number there, 4, you want to go ahead and use the length properties in case the array changes. Okay. So first we start off by using these indexes to reference the elements in the array. An array start at counting at 0. So we have Mary at index 0, John at 1, Susan at 2, and Robert at 3. Okay. So the length of this array is 4 if you specify the name of the array .length. Here is some example program. These are programs I'm going to go ahead and show you at the termination of my review of this chapter. So we'll have some live code to look at in just a minute. But basically, in this particular example that you see here, I go ahead and declare an array to hold 10 elements, and then I populate it using a for loop. Here you see the output, and we have another example here. Now arrays, many times you can use them for processing, like for example summing, and I'll show you an example of that. But basically that's done this way. You have sum get sum plus, and then the arrays of index. Multi-dimensional arrays, you can have many of them. Most of the time, two-dimensional arrays is about as far as my little brain can go. So this chapter is pretty much all about one-dimensional arrays and two-dimensional arrays. Here's a comparison between a one-dimensional array and a two-dimensional array. I'll show you this in some live code in just a minute. So, in summary, declaring a one-dimensional array, this is the syntax. Declaring a two-dimensional array, you have curly brackets inside of curly brackets. Basically, we like to go ahead and use the white space here to give us a simulation of rows and columns, okay? So that's pretty much the end of the chapter on here. We could go to the summary of the chapter and give us a good way of summarizing that an array is a group of contiguous memory locations that all have the same name and same type. And to declare an array, this is the syntax that we use. This is an example of declaring an array of ints or declaring a string array. Populating an array is done as an assignment statement, and the length of the array can be found by using the length property. And that's pretty much it. Now I want to go ahead and show you some example code. So I've arranged these demos from the book into little methods that I will uncomment and run one at a time. So the first one is creating an array object. Now, these are from your book. I embellished them a little bit. So the first one, as you remember here, we had a string array called reindeers, and it was Dasher, Dancer, etc. Well, how do you access the values in this array? Well, you're going to use the index value. Okay, so there's 8 of them, so we're going to go from 0 to 7 on here. Okay, and then what I'm doing here is I'm using an assignment statement to mutate the first element in there. So somehow or another, we're going to get rid of Dasher and we're going to put Fred in there, you know? So then I just show the thing again. Now, the reason one of the reasons I'm showing you all this code here is you're going to see the benefits of using a loop here. Now, using the index values like this is no problem if you're going to be referring to like 1 or 2 of them. But if you're going to be referring to hundreds or thousands of them, you're definitely going to want to go ahead and use a loop. So let me go ahead and run this. So basically, the idea behind this is I declare an array, I populate it, I show you what's in it, and I change one thing in here, and then I show it again. That's all there is to it. So let me go ahead and run that and show you what the output is. So we've got the values in the reindeer names array, Dasher all the way to Blitzen, right? Then I go ahead and change the first Dasher's name to Fred, and then I show the contents of the array again, and then I use the length property to show you that indeed we have 8 elements in this array. So that's the first one on there. Hopefully you got something out of that. Let's go on to the next one on here. The first one was an example that she gave from a string array. And then the next one here is going to be using numbers, and I embellished it as well a little bit from the chapter. So the first thing I do on here is I declare an array of ints. I'm going to do 5 of them. It was originally going to hold 25, but that's just too many. I like to see numbers that are really easy on the eyes, that I can see and validate very easily. So I'm going to go ahead, instead of using the index values brute force with those, square brackets, I'm going to use a loop here, and I'm going to use I. I stands for index. That's what I stands for. So I'm initializing I to 0, and we're going to go ahead. The test is going to be I. We're going to loop as long as I is less than the length of temps, and then we're going to be incrementing by 1. So inside the body of this loop, we have an S out, and I simply show the contents of temps. Okay. Now the idea here is that each element has an initial value. Did I populate this? No. So what's in it? Well, it's an object, so it's got what you see depends upon what data type you're dealing with, right? Your book tells you, like if it's this, you got this in it. If it's got that, it's got. If it's an array of ints, they've got 0 in it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and show you that, and then what I end up doing on here. Let's see what I do. In this particular case, I'm assigning a number to the first one on here, to the first element, 100, right? And then I'm going to go ahead and show you the values, what's in there again. I only changed 1 from what I see here, right? I only changed 1. So let's just go ahead and run this. And you'll see here that the array had zeros in it, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I go ahead and put 100 in the first element. That would be element 0, right? And then the other ones continue to have zeros in them. Of course, their array's length for temps is 5. So hopefully you find that instructive. Let's go ahead and go on to the next example on here. I'm going to comment this out. And let's go on the next one here. Sample array 1. So let's look at it first. And you could, if these methods look too long for you, you can just collapse them like this, right? If you collapse them like this, it kind of like, it's not that, you don't have to scroll as much. So sample array 1, I assign 5 to number, and then I go ahead and create an array length of 10. And what I'm going to be doing on here is I'm going to use a loop, and I'm going to be printing out the I element of the array is, and then I'm going to be incrementing by 5. Very simple array, utilizes a loop. So basically what you're seeing here is how loops and arrays go together, or how arrays and loops go together on here. We have an assignment statement here. And the assignment statement, the first time you pop in here, it's going to put 5 in there, right? So the first one. Then I'm going to increment 5 on 5. That would give me 10, right? So when I come back over here, then I'm going to go ahead and put 10 in there. So you just continue to iterate. So the I will give me the index value, and the contents or the value in the array will be acquired by the array names and then the I in brackets, square brackets. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. So here we see it incrementing by 5. So I said 5, 10. That's about as far as my little brain went. And this particular demo is going, I cut it short. The one in your book, I think, was a lot longer. She likes to have very long loops. I went ahead and just did this 10 times, right? So if we're doing 5 times, 10 is 50. These are numbers that I can do in my head and validate, fairly easily, right? So let's go ahead and go do the next example here. And again, these are embellished or demos from her book. So in this next example here, I initialize an array, 10 elements. I'm going to use a loop on here. Now what is happening here is notice how I've commented out 2 things. This is the same as the previous example, except that instead of having number outside, declaring number and incrementing it inside the body, I am doing that inside the first line of the for loop. So I'm initializing 5. I'm initializing number to 5, and then I'm incrementing number here. And that's pretty much your preference. Do you want to do it this way, or do you want to do it the previous way? It really doesn't matter. Okay, so those 2 are exactly the same. It's just putting the stuff in a different place. So the next one on here. This is our, I'm going to call it sample array 3. And it's a little bit lengthier here. I went ahead and maybe I added a couple of extra things. So I initialized sum to 0. I'm going to do a little sum. Then I create an array length of 5. I use a little loop. And in the loop, I'm traversing the array. I'm incrementing the sum. And I'm incrementing the number. Now, these 2 styles are pretty much the same. Like this one here, number plus equals 1 could be written as number gets, which is the equal sign, right? Number gets number plus 1. That's kind of like the long way. This is the shorthand way. I could write this one in that similar fashion. I could say sum plus equals arrays of I, and it accomplishes, the same idea. So basically, I'm saying the sum of the elements is, and the average is, or average. Oh, did I don't. Oh, yeah, my eyes didn't see this. I've got sum divided by the length of the array, which gives me average. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it to test it, see if it works. So I've got, the 0th element having 1 in it, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I can see, very plainly that adds up to 15. The example she had in her book, she had very large incrementers, so I couldn't do the math in my head. So what I did was I just went ahead and dumbed it down so I could follow along without a calculator. Not that I don't trust her calculations, or I just don't, computers are something, code is something that you've got to verify, especially if you can't, do the math, in your head. All right, so let's go ahead and go on to the next one on here. Last example. And this is sample array 2D. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. I'm collapsing that one. So this is right out of her book. She showed you how to initialize a 2D array, but she didn't show you how to go ahead and access the values in there or do anything with it. So I'm going to show you how to do it two ways. You're getting the idea here. You can do it brute force, by utilizing the square brackets. All right. So you've got, if you look on here, got a 2D array. It's got 4 rows and 3 columns. So we've got, you can see the 0 is the first row, 1 is the second row, 2 is the third row, 3 is the fourth row. And then inside of these rows, we've got 3 columns, 0, 1, and 2. That will give me access to these numbers here. So what we have, when we initialize this 2D array, what we have is each row is going to be a enclosing curly brackets, and the whole thing is going to be enclosing curly brackets. That's that's the syntax for the 2D array. I print a blank line between the two, and then this same brute force is then done again the easy way with a nested loop, where the outer loop, as we can see here, traverses the rows, and the inner loop traverses the columns. Then we have an S out here where I will acquire the index value for the row and the column. Now you can use any variable names if you want. A lot of people like to use I and J. I like to use row and column because that's what they are. Okay, so let me go ahead and run this and show you how the brute force way, or the first way I did this, produces the same results as the loop does. So you're gonna find out that sooner or later you're gonna have to graduate to using nested loops. So that's pretty much my rendition of this chapter on arrays. I hope that you enjoyed it, and be seeing you around. Thank you very much.